I've mentioned the terms reliability and validity in regards to assessment previously, but just to clarify what we're meaning there, reliability is about consistency. It's about no matter how many times that assessment's done, it will produce the same results as long as it's under the same conditions. Validity is about how accurate that measure is. So how well do the results represent what's being measured? Now, both of those things can only be guaranteed in assessment if you have a robust marking criteria. So in this short video, I'm just going to show you a couple of examples of different types of marking criteria. This is not an exhaustive discussion by any means, and there will be other ways of doing it, but what I'm going to show you is a sort of very basic tick box type marking criteria versus a rubric, so one that looks at different standards. So both of the examples I'm going to show you here are for OSCEs, so Observed Structured Clinical Examinations. These are real OSCEs that are used on the BSc Oral Health Sciences course, which is one of the undergraduate courses I teach, but obviously they can be applied across a variety of examples. So the first one we're going to look at is a very basic OSCE, simply on how the students are washing their hands. This is set against a very set standard criteria within their infection control policy. And it's really a case of, did the student do it to that standard or not? So this criteria has a set number of processes that the student required to follow. So there's 10 steps, and they get 2 attempts at this assessment. So it's really a case of yes or no in these boxes. So on first attempt, did they manage step 1, step 2, step 3, and so on. The advantage of this kind of marking criteria is that it's very simple. No matter who is marking this, they can tick, yes, they did that, yes, they did that. And it's fairly objective. It's a yes-no type process. The disadvantage is that there is little to no explanation for that assessor. So for example, step 2, rub hands palm to palm, that assessor, this marking criteria, is presuming that that assessor knows what that statement means, that that assessor knows how long the student requires to be going through that process, that that assessor knows the extent to which the entire palm should be covered, and so on and so forth. That's a reasonable assumption to make if you have been through a good quality calibration process. I'm going to talk about calibration in a separate situation. But if this is a process that all your assessors are doing on a regular basis, it's a reasonable assumption to make. Going back to advantages, because it's so simple and easy to use, it's easily accepted. It takes minimal preparation from the assessor because they can really easily just flick through that and be like, yep, go for it. Minimal explanation required by the person who's setting the assessment, whether that be a module leader, program director, even a regulatory body. This will only work for a very straightforward yes or no type procedure. There is no room for grading in here, and that wouldn't be appropriate for this kind of assessment anyway. Ultimately, can a student wash their hands or not? There is really no grading of how well they can wash their hands. It's can they do it or not? And I've chosen this example because I think all of us in clinical care would understand that example, but there will definitely be things within your own specific field that is one of these. They can do it or they can't. Satisfactory or unsatisfactory, pass, fail. So I'm going to switch now to look at a different type of assessment criteria, and this is also for an OSCE, And this is a very specific dental OSCE, so I apologise if some of the context is not particularly relevant for you, but the concept is the same. What we have here is again a pass-fail situation, but what we're looking at now is a rubric. There is again our list of points that are being assessed, but then within our grading columns we have what the student requires to do to meet those. Now this is again set up as a pass-fail, but you could quite easily have a number of columns here. You could, depending on what your categories were, if you're talking about A, B, C, D, you know, excellent, good, satisfactory, unsatisfactory, whatever it is, you could easily add more columns there. So this is maybe for a more complex procedure, and there will be definite, you must do this, and if the students don't meet those, that's obviously going to go in the fail column. But there may also be a standard to which you would expect the minimum or the borderline student do, and then one that's doing quite well and one that's really excelling. So what this rubric provides us with is a more reliable process in that it's much more objective. As the marker, I'm being given set criteria that tells me how to appoint that student into the appropriate column on this marking rubric. Again, there is always an element of assumption as to what the assessor knows. For example, you see in here we've got good posture and poor posture. So you could argue that that's a subjective statement. What I consider to be good posture and what somebody else considers to be good posture could be different. However, again, that comes back to a calibration element. But otherwise you can see it's more specific in terms of the exact criteria that we're looking for. So for example, if I just come to this point here, iatrogenic damage, talking about accidental damage to the tissues in the area, it's a yes or no situation from here. You can see that there's no iatrogenic damage in order for it to be a pass, and there is in order for it to be a fail. But from the other side of things, looking at a slightly less black and white, for example, we've got lining placed in an appropriate location, whereas lining placed incorrectly or insufficient or excessive, you know, so there's more detail provided there than simply the yes or no that we had on the previous marking criteria. So the first one we looked at is a tick box. It's a pass-fail, and it's presuming that the nature of the assessment is so straightforward that the assessor would easily know if they did or didn't do it. This type of criteria we've got here, which is a rubric, is giving us scope to talk about how well a student did it and providing criteria which allows the assessor to fit it into the appropriate grading column. So depending on what you're planning on doing for your assessment, you can make a decision as to which you would prefer to use and which would be most appropriate for your setting.